welcome to the
Hello.
Hey there, welcome to the State Board of Education meeting for Wednesday rather, November 3rd, following the Braves' remarkable World Series.
Mike Royal's got a T-shirt for all of us.
I'll get them out of the truck.
He'll get him out of the truck.
We're all gonna get to wear that shirt.
How did you know that?
Go Braves,
He already
go
told you
Braves.
that trick.
And I appreciate everyone being here today, and for those of you, I know that many of you are aware of Butch Mosley's passing. He's been recognized widely across the state. There's been some remarkable recognitions for him. We miss him dearly, and very, very much appreciate all the service that he provided to the students and families across the entire state of Georgia and to the State Board of Education. We are gathered here today to discuss Senate Bill 68. And there are changes to Senate Bill 68 that I think many of us have become familiar with, but at the same time, there's in that legislation a lot of what we call shall language with regard to what the State Board of Education must do now. And it has to do largely with audit responsibilities for finances of local boards of education. Michael, I know that you're aware of this, keenly aware of this, and your role and many other members as well for kind of the oversight we've had with regard to financial matters and affairs of others, local education authorities. I want to check and see who we have online from the State Board of Education. I think I saw Leonte, is that right? Leonte, are you there? Kenneth, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, terrific.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, good morning, Kenneth.
Scott Johnson.
Scott Johnson.
Scott Johnson here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, for those of you who don't know, had the pleasure of parachuting yesterday with the Navy Golden
Army.
Army, the Golden
Golden
Knights. The Army Golden Knights.
But I must say, I was the first one to do it.
And
They
Mike
just
Long,
followed in my
Mike
footsteps.
Long did it too.
And then Mike Long as well. If you're gonna jump out of a perfectly good airplane, I think I would put my hands in trust in the Army. All right.
Indeed.
And then, what I wanna do is, we've got Susan Haynes on the line, and we also have Stacy Super Drake on the line to be able to address any questions that you may have regarding Senate Bill 68. Matt Cardoza, is anybody from Godot presenting on this bill? Yeah, so we're gonna call up Russ Rome right now with the Georgia Department of Education.
No, the number.
SB 68 is all the code section.
Thank you, everybody. Wish I had my Braves jersey. Do we have the PowerPoint? Guess while he's going ahead and getting that started, I'll just start my opening slide, which is, this Senate Bill 68, what we tried to do in our FBO office, finance office, is go through there and look at the financial pieces of this bill and kind of break that out for you guys. The first slide, which I'll show in a minute, which is, the main part of the bill, which is to strengthen provisions relating to financial management of local school systems. I think it also states, provide training for local Board of Education members and local school superintendents on financial management, provide for monthly reporting to the local Board of Education, to provide for designation by the Department of Audits and Accounts. These are the financial pieces that we went through the bill and kind of pulled out to kind of talk about today from our side. And I'll go through and I'll also note some of the stuff that we're currently doing in our financial review division, which is part of FBO. And in that division, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is also included in this bill, and some of the authorities, it may be something that comes from the State Board of Education in the future, but these are duties that we were currently already doing as part of federal compliance and OMB. So a lot of the stuff that we've kind of tailored to gear towards the Senate Bill 68 and to try to achieve some of these results that are in the language of the bill, we've already been doing for a lot of years. We're good? Let's see. Do you have the PowerPoint? Oh, one minute.
1 minute.
I could jump in, and when she gets on, we'll go and I'll show. Oh, here we go. The next slide.
You can do it.
Oh, I can do it?
Put it there.
Oh. Perfect. That's what we just discussed. So first thing I want to go over is some of the items that we noted in the law that related to financial piece. The first one, OCGA 20-2-49, which adds financial management to local board members' duties. And as you can see, if you're not colorblind like myself, there is a red that indicates the language change up there on the PowerPoint. So, also OCGA 20-2-51, which requires board members up for re-election must have completed all prior annual training requirements established in 20-2-230. We've got 20-2-58, which mandates monthly review of financial status of local school system by the local board, and also requires the State Board of Education to create a template for school system to use to review the financial status, which shall include, at a minimum, a statement of revenues, expenditures, and encumbrances. I'll talk some more about that later on. And then the next one, OCGA 20-2-61, which provides that the requesting and reviewing of financial data and documents by local board members shall not constitute micromanaging. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Next one is OCGA 20-2-67, and this is important. This is where the Department of Audits and Accounts shall designate local school systems that have had reported irregularities or budget deficits for 3 or more consecutive years as high risk. And if they've got irregularities or budget deficits for 1 or 2 years, they're considered moderate risk. And this is a change in how these districts are noted as whether they're high or moderate risk. OCGA 20-2-67 also states the State Board of Education shall inform the local superintendent of the local system of the irregularities or budget deficits, including a local school system that has been designated as high risk or moderate risk. The local school superintendent shall submit to the Georgia Department of Education a corrective action plan that is approved by their local board at a board meeting within 120 days of receiving notice of designation as a high risk or moderate risk.
Can I jump in, go back to that real quick?
Yes, sir.
Shockingly, we have inconsistency in the law because it says that the state board has to send a letter.
Yes.
But then the report comes back to Godot. And I want to highlight that because we have had discussions about the fact that Godot, the department, not the board, but the department sends letters out.
Yes, we
A
do.
form of a letter.
Yeah, we
for
call it
this
a
very
clearance
reason.
letter.
But this now says that we as a board have to do it. But after that process, after that part, it then reverts back to Godot is the one that is supposed to receive the corrective action within 120 days, as opposed to the board. And I think some of the discussions that we've had in our preliminary meetings for Budget/Audits Committee, which is still a combined committee, that there's gonna have to be some meetings had here in this room, not just on that side, but here, where these systems come and meet with us and are accountable to us, since we're the one that's sending the letter. And I think that's what's different about this. I'm glad we're having this presentation, but I wanted to make sure everybody understands what is required of us now. And I think that it needs to be highlighted here. I mean, I don't know why they did it that way, but they say, the board sends the letter, but then Godot's the one that actually gets the report.
Correct, yeah.
But I think that our job is in tandem with that as a board.
Russ, there are certain, and I agree with what Jason's saying, there's certain things that the state board delegates to Godot. And I don't know that something like this has been delegated to Godot, do we know?
I don't think we've addressed delegating anything, and Tiffany can tell me if I'm wrong, but specific to Senate Bill 68. Now, the clearance letters, as I stated, when we took it, and I know a lot of work went into this bill, and our financial review team was involved in as well. And as I said, the clearance letters that we send, we've been doing as part of federal compliance for years. So what we did was just modified, and really the main difference was those were required to have a 180-day turnaround, and these require 120 days. So we basically just changed our letters to state you have to submit your corrective action plans within 120 days. Now, going forward, if the board sends them or endorses them, I think we still have to send something for federal compliance related, whether or not, those go through the board or not. We can look into that.
This may or may not be the appropriate time, but you've got two items there at the bottom. Designation as a high-risk or moderate-risk school system. Are you gonna define those for us or let us know the criteria?
Well, that's what they said is basically when they get their audit reports and if they have the system of irregularities or findings and budget deficits, then if it's for 3 or more years, then they're gonna be classified as high risk. It was a little less defined in the past. Audits had a lot more say in how they determined whether or not they were high risk. But I mean, to us, if you have a budget deficit, I believe a budget deficit has always been automatic high risk. And moderate risk is, 1 or 2 years.
Are we asking questions now, or are we gonna wait until, are we gonna stop as we go and ask questions? Do we know?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm good with, I can talk about the finance piece, but so I'm good at, we can go either way. The next slides, I'm just gonna go through the process, just how it's currently working. So this is the last slide on the actual finance piece of the law.
Well, can you go back then to the thing on, where it's something on a monthly basis? I think it's that
Yes.
20.2.58. So
And
the State Board of Education creates a template for the school systems.
I'm just gonna bounce.
Is that happening already? I mean, is that,
Yeah,
are they
this
already?
is the template.
Okay, but it's coming from us,
No,
No.
this is
Not
part of
either local.
Fumgala, which is our,
local board, okay, from us to them, or they have to send it to us? Cause it says from the State Board of Education.
they don't have to send this to us. This just says that because they're designated high risk, their local finance department has to submit one of these at each of their budget meetings, their monthly budget meetings to
Got
their
it.
local board.
Got it.
This will not be submitted back to the state board. This is something, another thing I was talking about is, we've been doing this for years as part of our Fumgala, that
Right.
this template, now, they don't have to use this template, but this is something that we do provide districts. They just have, at a minimum, it has to have revenues, expenditures, encumbrances.
Okay.
And so that's,
Then,
I'll go
to
back.
the other question that Jason had, would we be in compliance if we sent the letter out, but then directed them to respond back to Godot? Would that be in compliance? Because that is a little confusing.
Yeah, I'll defer
Go
to
to the next
the attorneys on the line for that, as whether or not it's allowed. The law states that the State Board of Education shall send the letters, and the corrective action plans will come back to us. I
Yeah.
can tell you, currently, we are sending the current corrective action letters, but that's because
Okay.
we've been doing it for, like I said, years and years, but.
But
long
Courtney,
as-
thank
Part
you.
of- as part of the budget, and we talked about this audit committee, if we had this audit committee, those would go
Correct.
back to audit, and that would be, to me, the best transition. You send it, it comes to audit, they review it, and then I guess what we used to do, Mike, you can speak to it
Yeah, well,
because y'all
Mr. Chair,
did it.
to help us flow through this, it might be good to let Rusk go through a couple more, cause I saw some of the things
Yeah, that
ahead.
too.
Okay.
They're going to address, I think, some of the questions I'm hearing and that I would be asking if I didn't know what was coming and had been part of the audit committee that we had for so many years up until recently.
That's on their
So
last.
because actually, board members, there's way more to it than even this.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Back.
Yeah,
So-
no, that's.
Yeah, now I was just gonna walk through kind of how this process is currently working. I'll say that. So, Department of Audits notifies the local system of its status based on irregularities noted in the audit. And that's when they issue their report. And that's later on we can discuss, but that's important to us because the law states that, they have that 120 days from the date that they're notified. Now, whether that's notified by letter or by what we actually are treating it as is when they get their audit report. So the date that they get their audit report, they know they have findings, budget deficits, they should be notified. In our opinion, that's where we start the clock of 120 days. So then the Department of Audits will issue an audit committee letter, which is sent to the local school system and a copy to the Georgia Department of Education Financial Review. And I also believe the State Board of Education gets a copy of that letter as well. Georgia Department of Education Financial Review issues a clearance letter to the local school system requesting a corrective action plan be approved by the local Board of Education. As we said, the local system has 120 days from the notification of the risk status to develop a board-approved corrective action plan. And this corrective action plan is provided to our Department of Education Financial Review, and they monitor the progress. The superintendent of the high-risk, moderate local school system is required to attend financial management training. And we've kind of coordinated with this because as part of this training, does not only include Godot staff, it also includes the Department of Audits. So we have worked with the Department of Audits to ensure that we're going to have all our high-risk and moderate-risk districts at the Monday, I believe this is the Gale Conference, which is Monday, January 24th, 2022. So that's where they'll be getting their specialized training. And I think we have some breakouts specific to address this at that conference.
Are they allowed to bring staff with them?
I believe that they are, yes. And, another part of it's not up here, but I don't think I have it noted later, but Department of Audits also is required in the law to, it's right, the next slide. Board members of the high-risk local schools.
How frequently are those trainings conducted?
Well, we just started it, and we were going to do, I believe it's annually, but I can double check on that. I know the Gales where we were trying to get we knew all the high risk and moderate risk districts would be there. There's also, as you can see on number 8, they're required, their new board members training also has a Senate Bill 68 piece in there. And that, which we've already, we've been doing the new board member training. We've kind of modified some of the training to include Department of Audits because they've got a piece that they've got to do. And that's going to occur November 16th.
I think there's also a new requirement too that in order for a board member to seek re-election, they have to demonstrate that they've completed their training and they're current on their training.
Correct, yeah. And the 711 I skipped over here was that, Department of Audits is also required at the end of the engagement to conduct training with that local board and our local school system, and they are doing that at when they complete their audits and they do their audit engagement. Examples in the district that we discussed earlier, theirs is December 7th. So the Department of Audits is already actively doing this. They're higher moderate risk districts. And then the new board member training, which I know Mike knows all about. We've been doing that for a long time. This next slide I just kind of put in here because it is something that's of note, but we're still reviewing it. But we did receive notification from the Department of Audits, the state auditor, that the intent of Senate Bill 68 was that state charter schools were not included. As I said, we're still reviewing it because that was something that was sent directly to the state auditor and forwarded on to us. So it's an interesting. Next 2 slides are as we were talking about, the monthly templates. This is what we send, and as I stated, this is in the FUMGALA that the districts or local school systems have been aware of for years and years, but we've also, as part of Senate Bill 68, we resend this template out along with our example of what they can utilize to comply with Senate Bill 68 and provide their local boards of their financial actions. This last slide, which, man, I wish I could have made it bigger, but this is, I think, what we were talking about earlier, and what in prior audit committees, we did have a list like this, which was what we consider a lot of deficit reporting of districts and the high-risk designees back then. Now this is These are the Senate Bill 68 high-risk and moderate-risk districts. And this is a report that's prepared and tracked by our Financial Review Division. And as you can notice, if you can see the, if I come around here and see it, that audit report date up there is the date that the actual Department of Audits issued their report. We dated them corrective action plans are due when they're due. We've actually received several corrective action plans currently, and we're tracking, and then we follow up with emails, and we're tracking that too to notify them to make sure they're in compliance. So this, actually what we did, we've been talking with Jason and Mike during our pre-budget committee meeting where we discussed these items. We've included this, and we'll include it going forward as part of budget committee as an item for information.
And this is based on fiscal year 2021?
Well, it depends on
data,
that.
or is this on current fiscal year?
This is the current list, Department of Audits, the high risk and moderate risk that they just completed the audits. Now, you know, column, that most recent audit, there's 2 of them that are 19. So some of them, they just completed their 19 audit. And some of them, most of them are 20s audit that they've completed. A couple of them are 19. Once audits sends us that list, they go on here. Now, I will note that the bottom 2, Jeff Davis and Thomasville City, audits has not issued their letter yet, but we've already seen their audit report, so we know they'll be included on the next round. So we've got them on our tracking sheet.
Up till 2 years ago, when we used to have audit committee, say it because some people might get offended by this, but oh well, it is what it is. This list was reviewed all the time, and it was referred to as the dirty dozen. It wasn't always a dozen; they would come and go, but this was tracked, talked about, discussed, and regularly we would have discussions in audit on these, and that's those were very I thought were very valuable. Actually, some of the most productive meetings we would have as state board, I think, as far as getting stuff done, were the audit meetings, because in there would be Greg Griffin and his team from state audit, Rusk's team. Well, then it was Ted, but Rusk and Amy. I don't know. Amy's doing training today. She's been around a long time, and she can smell a rat from here to Albany. But we'd have very frank and open discussions about, hey, you know, this was on. But we're getting good cooperation. And when I said there's a lot more that goes into this, and I'll give you some background. She would say we're getting cooperation. They're really trying. So yeah, they're on high risk, but let's do them here. Or this isn't an actual thing happened. Auditors went to a school district. They had an appointment with the superintendent. They showed up for their 2:00 appointment, asked for the superintendent, and the receptionist said the superintendent, he's not available. He's not here. And I said, well, we have an appointment. Can we meet with the CFO? And she said, the receptionist actually said, well, the superintendent told him not to be here either. So that type of information is what was shared. And so obviously that one went high on the list, and we had what we called a prayer meeting. We called them up here. We had a couple prayer meetings over the years up here with boards. And you put them on high risk, and it's so I think the audit committee, that's the type of interaction and stuff we had on this, which I think was very productive. What here also is very important to consider is local districts have the option of using the state auditor or their own audit team. How many are on state versus private? Russ, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. There's several, a lot that use their own own accounting firms, which is good and bad. Because we know the ones that are being audited by the state, there's consistency in what they're looking for. And we know there's a couple auditors around the state of Georgia that specialize in school systems. And what they do is going to be consistent from district to district. We have had at times districts trying to avoid this list and CPA shop. where they had a team that they didn't like what they said, they fired them and would go interview until they got someone that said, when they asked them in the meeting, what's 1 + 1? And the auditor said, what do you want it to be? And that's who they hired. Versus some of the other teams that were very consistent and specialized in school board operations and government operations. So that's another level of technical difficulty for this board and is added to it because we have our state audit team, we have private auditors who specialize in school boards, and then we've got some that don't. And not all the ones that don't aren't necessarily doing a bad job. Stan, you got a question?
Well, I was gonna ask Russ, would it be fair for me to assume that the great majority of school districts use the Department of Audits and Accounts for their audit?
Yes.
It's the large systems that
Yeah.
tend to
Large.
use,
They're all.
like in Bibb County, we did. We had a private auditor.
We did too, but
Yeah.
I'm not gonna take my experiences
Right.
without asking somebody else.
Yeah.
But the overwhelming majority use the Department of Audits and Accounts.
Yes, that's correct.
And one comment on that, from serving on that for 4 years, is that, like Mike said, when all the cake is starting to be baked, the idea that what DOE and audit, y'all could serve and give back to these districts and say, hey, these are certain things that you might try to do. I mean, it was a helpful kind of thing too. So there are compromises that come out with, all right, you're on a high risk, but here's some steps that you can start to maintain so that you can bring it down. And I think that's was a real helpful thing.
To Mike's point, and we can, go back and say, this is the work that was done, and there was a ton of work that was done before on an audits committee, and it never should have been done away with. The ship sailed. Here we are now with this. And I think we all are probably in agreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the conversations I've had, it's time to split the audits committee back apart from budget, because we definitely have a lot of work now, a lot of new duties. And I think that's probably what we're gonna have to do. And it's not gonna be a quick little 30-minute kind of committee that meets either. There may even be specially called committee meetings for it.
There were.
Absolutely. I mean, especially with this work. And I mean, you're talking about there were before we had this added work put on us. And that's my thought. And again, that's why we're having this though. I mean, so we know what the work is that we need to do moving forward, and we need to act on this quick. I mean, they have 120 days from when we send the letter, and they're starting up their budgets for next year.
That's right.
I mean, after the first of the year, a lot of them start doing workshops.
In my message to Godot, Superintendent Woods and his team, I said you fully should expect coming out of this meeting that we'll be reconvening the audit committee.
Also, Russ, when we did this before and we would look on the what was coming down the pipe, state law says that districts within so many months of the end of the fiscal year shall provide the audit report to the state board. What we found when we came on, and those of you that didn't have the privilege of knowing Barbara Hampton, when she was a stickler for this, we were finding that there were schools that hadn't reported their audits in 3 years. Literally. And so what we did is we systematically, year after year, worked through those to get them caught up. And what we said, and we voted on and had discussions on, is okay, we, the board, and it's gonna give me the question number 2, because I think it's very important in the law versus conflict, is if you do not get us this budget or submit your audit within X days, and it was different for the ones that were 3, we're given more time. I mean, we came with a sliding scale. You are going to be automatically put on high risk. And what does that mean? Well, I guess my question is differentiating between the law. It says the state audit department shall put you on high risk, and the board has high risk. We have the ability, that's one of the abilities of the board, is to vote and put a district on high risk. And one of the main significant things that happens when a district is put on high risk by the board is their federal funds then become reimbursement, not distributed out before. So that can have tremendous financial consequences to a local board. Where's the difference? So the way I'm reading it, right now is there's a difference between the state audit team putting in them a higher and moderate versus the state board putting, am I reading that still correctly?
Correct, and I think that's I think the list you're referring to was the list, the monitors, the subrecipient federal programs, and the meetings that we would have with, I remember with Greg and
Yeah.
that team. I think that's a federal, that was more of a federal guided list. Now, since this is a new one, how we intermingle the two, that hasn't been addressed. But
Because I think this has huge significance, more significance than ever. Because if these districts, I mean, if you read the letter from the auditor, what they're using is irregularities are any significant deficiency or material weakness finding reported related to internal controls.
Yeah.
Number one, huge. And then budget deficits, the stuff that hits the spreadsheet. With the dollars that are being doled out on Recovery Act, I've seen this movie and it doesn't end pretty. I've had to be in the meeting where we were explaining to the governor's chief of staff and the governor's folks and office, good gosh, financial office, no. Why the state of Georgia was having to write a check to the federal government for millions of dollars because it was improperly used by a local district. OPB, thank you, Office of Planning and Budget. And these irregularities and not using funds correctly, we, the State Board of Education, are ultimately responsible for the districts receiving those funds. And we are ultimately responsible for if they use them incorrectly and how we're gonna deal with it. And with the number of dollars, and thank heavens that there were not a lot of strings attached to some of the last funds. Matt could probably speak to that better, and he knows, he was there for that. He saw the movie as well. And Rusk did too. He's seen that movie. But I'm telling you, this is huge that we get on this right now and are very diligent in our efforts on those material weaknesses, internal controls, and deficits so that we don't have an issue for the taxpayers of the state of Georgia in a couple of years because it's going to happen when the federal auditors come to visit and say, what did you do with those billions and billions of CARES Act funds?
Yeah, and I've had a chance to talk with Matt about this, but the rules in expending these funds can be very complex at times with regards to offsets, for example, and how you're spending money and what's been allocated. How much, just in round numbers, how much did Georgia receive in CARES Act or Recovery Act funds? Fred, K-12? $6.5 billion. It's not a small number.
I think another thing to keep in mind about this is local boards have three jobs. Hire and fire a superintendent, balance a budget annually, and enact policies that enable and allow the superintendent to run the system on a day-to-day basis. Local systems, and we've seen this happen, we've seen this movie, get in trouble by micromanaging. That's not what this is. This is failing to manage, period. This is failing to ask the questions that you need to be asking through your training to do one of the three jobs you have as a local board member. And I think that's what's frustrating about it, particularly for those of us that have served on local boards or have been involved in public education and understand how budgets work at the local level. I can only imagine what it's like serving on the state board, having gone through this and seen this. And it's just very frustrating.
It's not I used to remark that there was only one place in Georgia code that the word micromanage appeared. And it was that it's not the duty of the local boards to micromanage the superintendent. I'm paraphrasing. But now it's in two places.
Yeah.
And, asking these financial questions is not considered micromanagement.
And it says that.
Yeah.
It even says requesting information is not micromanaging. And local board it even calls out local board members and puts it on them. And what we're gonna find out, and we've had these conversations, is some of these systems are gonna kick the can down the road and point fingers at other people. The buck stops with them, with the local board. They're elected by the people to be stewards, fiscal stewards of that system.
At the end of the day, you know, when somebody's in either high risk or moderate risk, and let's say it perpetuates and they don't take corrective action, what recourse is available? I mean, you know, and some of this is late. I mean, we're looking at 2019, 2020 numbers and so forth. And if this has gone on for an extended period of time, you know, what recourse is available either from the Godot side, from the state board side, and I certainly know possibly, you know, financial management is certainly one of the criteria for accreditation as well. That's a whole different subject.
I'm glad we have Stacy, and I think we have reached out because, as you're aware, we're dealing with a similar issue with one of these specific districts where we're kind of trying to look at what we have. I mean, and I've had conversations with our general counsel, and you know, we've got some things at our disposal, whether it's sending out our internal audit team, which I know we've done in the past, calling or requesting these districts to come up and to the board meetings to, you know, discuss their progress, I guess I could say. We've got, you know, some of our competitive grants, we could look at those kind of things. I mean, there's not much you can do in QBE. There are federal compliance things that we could look into with that, but we do have a request out to the Attorney General's office to kind of assist us and elaborate on what further powers that we do have at our disposal when it comes to these type of
Withholding funds isn't one of those because you're harming the children.
Federal funds, you can actually. That is, the questions that Russ was just saying, we've asked those questions before. Yeah, and there are things that can be done. Some of them are much more symbolic than substance, but when you have a prayer meeting with, I can tell you, whenever we had the prayer meetings with the more rural districts, there was someone from their local paper here every time, and that was going to be the front page story that day, the next day, and the day after. And that pressure is one thing. But then as far as really what can we do, the biggest hammer, if you will, is the high risk designation and the withholding of federal funds onto a reimbursement basis. We can't withhold them when they've earned them, but we don't have to give them to them ahead of time. We can make them reimburse. And that would be devastating to some of these small, that they rely on those funds for the general operation of the district.
What else you got?
That's it. That was it. We got. Yes, sir.
Before we pull out our hammer, can we go back to what is required in the law?
Okay.
I think that was the first couple of slides.
Yeah, so now there's other stuff in the law. This is the financial piece.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess there's, the way I look at it, there's annual training that these local boards are gonna have to go through. We're gonna have to submit what we call a clearance letter, but a letter, you know, after the Department of Audits designates them as high risk. And, you know, I would elaborate on what Mike said earlier. When we were talking about the risks of the board, there used to always be two designations from our subrecipient monitoring piece and then Department of Audits. When we had our meetings, we brought both our lists together and compared and then found out, why do you have this district and we don't? Why do we have this? Now, that's the part that still needs to be worked out, is because this law has kind of said, Department of Audits, these will be your high risk and moderate risk districts. So that's the piece that still got to work out. But so there's annual training. They've got to submit, you know, a monthly budget, you know, revenues, expenditures, encumbrances to their local board. They have 120 days, which, as I said, they should be already doing all this because it's required in our FUMGALA, and they should be doing the clearance letter, which is part of the federal compliance things. We gave them 180 days. They now have 120 days to submit a corrective action plan to us. There's some changes around the training pieces, you know, and Department of Audits asking to go out there and actually do training at the end of the engagement for the local board on these deficits, and then the training that they'll be. There's a lot more, I would say there's a lot more additional duties on the Department of Audits than there was really for the Godot side of it. in this bill, but.
Let me interject here, and Angela, I might call Angela Palm with Georgia School Board Association is here as well, but I seem to recall that local board training for new members is 12 hours annually, is that right? And then it's 9 hours for existing board members?
Yeah, excuse me, yes, and the finance piece is done by the department. And previously, some state board members have been involved in that. And the next new board member training is November 16th.
And then local boards of education, absent of attending, like, for example, Georgia School Board Association event, they still have the capability to pick approved trainers. Some of those are from the Georgia School Board Association. So they may do whole board training, for example, and have somebody come up. So whatever that 9 hours is comprised of is oftentimes determined by the local board, and they are required to submit their training plan on an annual basis, and I believe they submit that to the Georgia Department of Education.
And Scott, that comes through policy, that list of trainers, except
just
like
approved it.
Angela said.
Yeah, we
the-
do.
Yeah, we just approved
We
it.
just
Yeah.
approved that list, and some
Right.
resources were added to it, there are other things.
Right.
So,
Angela.
Scott, it's actually 15 for new board members, I forgot, and Justin just reminded me. There's a 3-hour local orientation that's required, plus 12 hours from an outside.
Okay.
So it's a total 15 training hours for a new board member.
And I
Thank
think
you.
This is the first, November 16th, first time we've had audits on the agenda as part of our piece.
For the new board member.
For the new board member
Okay.
training, yeah.
So going back, I want to understand, what is our charge as a board and what is the charge of Godot? So we have to provide a template, which you already have.
Correct.
And then let's go back. I think it's the slide before, where we have to send the letter.
Yes, that's the,
Let's go back to that slide.
is it this one or the next one?
That slide.
Yes.
So we have to send a letter to inform.
To inform them that they have 120 days to submit their corrective action. You've been designated
To the
as a
Georgia
high risk.
Department of Education.
Yes, and so those corrective action plans come to us. And then, which is similar in my tracking sheet, we're getting them now, so we have them, and then,
So who determines if the plan is good enough?
well, that's a question to be determined, I guess. Currently, the financial review team, which is
Well, it
tasked
says
with.
Godot, not the board.
Yeah, we get the corrective action, and we monitor their progress, and we ensure that, because if they don't, they can't turn in the necessary financial information that we need for them to, well, one, to become off the list, and two, to be able to operate. So that piece is tracked and monitored in our financial review division.
Okay.
Now, I would say our financial review division is only 4 folks.
And then
Russ.
go back to the slide before, financial management stuff. Who is charged with making sure they comply with that? Is
With,
that us? Is that Godot?
with the revenues and expenditures piece reporting.
Yes.
We talking
There-
about 20
in my-
50.
Yeah, which, the 20-2-58, we're giving them the tools to do this, but, and Stacy's on here, so she can interject if she wants. I'm not a lawyer, but I did read the law. I did not see anything that said we had to go back and monitor that they are doing this, but she can.
Thank you.
Good questions.
At most local board meetings, there is a monthly financial report
Yes.
presented that satisfies that requirement. But it doesn't-
Right.
It's usually a lot more elaborate than
I
that
just,
revenue expenditures.
the point of my question is I want to make sure that the state board understands what our correct charge is and we comply with that directly. Because we talked about a lot of things that are not in this Senate bill.
Well, they're in that big book already, though.
Mhm.
A lot of the things that we've
So
talked.
it's a long bill. The bill is existing. I mean, they just modified the existing bill. And we're really kind of talking about modifications, but there's a lot of responsibilities. One of the things I think we identified here is that there's, and I think Jason said, a little inconsistency with, what the state board has to do and what Godot has to do. And I think it would be helpful maybe to have maybe an internal rule that gets us on the same page.
Mhm.
Okay, and what that rule is, I'm unsure, but it's like, you know, if the state board is, you know, writing this letter, it's done in concert with, you know, the Georgia Department of Education. And if the Georgia Department of Education is writing something, it's done in concert with the State Board of Education. So there's, and really codifying that and importing that in some state board rule. And I think that might be a good way to look at this so that internally we're on the same page. Does that make sense?
Clarify, yep.
And I don't know who would craft that rule, but maybe internally at Godot with Superintendent Woods and the legal team, that this might be something for y'all to take a look at.
Well, and taking that a step further, where does the letter come from? Does it come from the chairman of the audits committee? Does it come from the chairman of the board as a whole? What is the specific language of the letter?
It says the state board shall.
Yeah.
I mean, but the devil's in the details.
Yeah, and how it worked before was when you had the communication between department, audit, and board, the letters were coming from the board, but everybody was leaving that meeting on the same page. And that's where I got to. There was so much good because, as Russ said, you know, Godot had its list, audits had its list, and we compared, and it said, well, audits would say, well, this one's on our, you know, top of our list, and it's not on yours. Why? And that's when the staff would say, well, we met with them, they've hired this firm, they're headed in the right directions. Because what you're going to find, there's three types that are going to be on there's those, and you know, we need to monitor, but they're headed and they're doing everything reasonable and correct. And then there's some that unfortunately, because of lack of research, you've got a person in there that was balancing the checkbook, that was sweeping the floors, that was doing all. They just didn't have the capacity and or the knowledge to do it correct and needed help. And that's when we would go down and give supportive service to them, help them find a local firm or do whatever. And then you've got the head in the sand that are just, you know, what audit? Doesn't matter. You know, leave us alone. You're in Atlanta.
So another question I think, you know, we'll need an answer to is, prior to a letter being sent, what kind of approval does it require by the state board? And so like, for example, if we, you know, adopt a resolution, the state board has to vote on the resolution. I mean, do we have to vote to essentially send these letters?
I don't know that we did, but I don't know that we had to. What we would do is bring it to,
At the meeting.
Yeah, at the meeting, in the public hearing, say this is what's going on. Mr. Chair of the Audit Committee would like to make a motion that we send Dooley County a letter to attend our next audit committee meeting on April 2nd, or Chair would like to make a motion that the State Board of Education shall put X county on high-risk status regarding to section, back to Matt's comment, there's so much other, section 12-4-1, and we'd vote on it and have an open discussion.
But would that not just be out of committee and then it would come to consent?
Come to the committee of the whole. Come out of the committee as a recommendation to the committee of the whole.
Would that typically be, but would it be done just as a consent agenda, or would you
No.
want, because I mean, we want to discuss, I mean,
No, it would
we're
not be
talking
done.
about public shaming here,
Yeah.
but I mean, we need to,
It was, I mean, I
needs to
feel
be highlighted.
comfortable in saying it was never done. It wasn't done a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet there were probably, because once you start doing this, word spreads fast. We've got our partners in education out there and in their newsletters, and like I say, it doesn't take many local for the Macon Telegraph to put that X county was from the Board of Education explaining why they're in deficit or they're on high risk. And there were probably, I guess, 5 prayer meetings and only 2 high risks.
It's a big wake-up call.
Yeah, it is.
We're looking at that list. It looked like there's probably at least 20 systems that were all down. 16.
Well, that was of that quarter's audits. That was 31% of the audits that the state had done on that quarter.
That list?
The list on the letter that Greg sent out, the current list from high risk and moderate that was sent to us
Yeah,
by,
there's fewer districts on that list than the list we just saw.
Talking about the letter we got from.
Yeah.
from.
So we gotta wrap this up,
Yeah.
but, anyway, I appreciate it. Does anybody have any further questions for Russ? And if not, are there any further questions, to be directed either to, the State Attorney General's office with Susan Haynes or with Godot on the legal side with Stacy Suberdray? Okay. If there's no more questions, Russ, thank you very much for your presentation, really appreciate it. It's a great information, and I think you can expect that there's going to be convening of the audit committee coming forward, and I appreciate your input today. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We're going to adjourn, and at this moment in time, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn for executive session to discuss legal, personnel, and student appeals.
So move for those reasons.
I have a first from Mr. Downey, a second from Martha. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. We're adjourned to executive session. Thank you very much.